in Karachi till his successful tenure in Iran. And in between, he has had several important assignments. But I do congratulate him for having written this excellent book on forgotten Kashmir. The research that he has done on this book deserves all the praise. And I think I will leave the important points which he has researched for him to speak when his turn comes to speak, because he will have many things to say on the subject. Unfortunately, POK is an area where Indian foreign policy has not been able to project much. And I hope that this book will help in raising the voice of the people on this subject. Friends, what I would like to do is come straight to the point and mention a few things on this forgotten area or this neglected area. You all know that the basis of administration of POK is the Karachi Agreement of April 28, 1949, which institutionalized Kashmiri subservience to Pakistan. It was signed on behalf of POK by its then President Sardar Ibrahim Khan. He has been quoted in the Kashmir Times of May 5, 2003, page 6, as saying, "Please do not blame me for this sin. I did not sign this agreement, the Karachi Agreement. I want to clear my name while I'm alive." In other words, the authenticity of the Karachi Agreement is being questioned today. If that is being questioned, the very setup of POK is being questioned. There are many other aspects which deserve equal attention. Pakistan supports the right of self-determination of the Kashmiri people, but there are many contradictions. The AJK constitution itself contains the provision of J&K's accession to Pakistan. The third point I would like to make is that 24 seats in the J&K Assembly lie vacant, as these are reserved for people across LOC. On the other hand, 12 seats in POK, AJK, which is called the Azad Kashmir, the assembly, are filled by residents living in Pakistan. In other words, as Barrister Sultan Muhammad said, this rigging of the Kashmir rigging is the most naked. That explains why in the POK assembly they can always have a government of their choice. The present ruling party did not have a single seat in the last assembly, and today it has a majority. So people living in Lahore and Karachi vote for elections held in Muzaffarabad. Have you heard this anywhere else in the world? There are many other contradictions in that country, but I would just mention POK has been discriminated by Pakistan on water resources. The Manga Multipurpose Dam on Jhelum River in Pakistan, largest reservoir located in Mirpur district of POK. Over 30,000 families were uprooted between 1961 and 67. And again in 2012, then the height of the dam was increased by 30 feet without due compensation to the 70,000 affected and displaced Kashmiris. Now over 100,000 Kashmiris live in New Mirpur city. Mangla Dam meets over 60% of Pakistan's electricity needs, earning several $1 million from electricity but required royalty has not been paid to POK. These are just some of the facts which I wanted to make to you. There are many other things I'm not going to touch on northern areas because I will leave that to the author to speak. I have myself spoken, written, and taken part in these deliberations in different parts. But I will conclude my remarks by quoting two Pakistani generals to show how at the highest level, at the level of the President of Pakistan, jihadi culture has been promoted in that country. I take you back to 1948 and the book by Major General Akbar Ahmad, the officer given the responsibility for organizing the raids. He states in his book, Raiders in Kashmir, I wrote out a plan under the title Armed Revolt Inside Kashmir and Open Interference at Aggression by Pakistan was obviously not desirable. It was proposed that our efforts should be concentrated upon strengthening the Kashmiris internally and to prevent arrival of armed civilian or military assistance from India into Kashmir. Here I cannot help but quoting Margaret Bourke White, who describes the plunder by the raiders. She says, their buses and trucks loaded with booty arrived every other day and took more Pathans to Kashmir. Ostensibly, they went to liberate their Kashmiri Muslim brothers, but their primary objective was riot and loot. In this, they made no distinction between Hindu, Sikhs, and Muslim. And I will conclude by a reference in the memoirs of DGMN, in the Pakistan Army, on my first posting in Pakistan. And by the time I arrived on my second tenure, he had already retired DG, as the head of the ISI. In his memoir, he writes,
most of the things are about the same.
Our government decided to extend some form of moral support to the people of Indian-held Kashmir. Consequently, the army was ordered to train volunteers in carrying out several
See carefully, you don't notice it.
ceasefire line.
इनको पता ही नहीं कि माइक
The president had ordered the GHQ was required to prepare two sets of plans. First,
Because
intensification of the firecracker type
you
of
spoke to
activity
whoever his name he had
was
sent.
already current.
Other people
But the embargo
talking in the
of
middle.
troops
The host,
in the ceasefire
IST
line
people.
remained. The second task
In the hospital, that's why he's here.
to plan an all-out support
Don't have to
for any gorilla
person
who were
I
inducted in the Indian Army.
Soupe or whatever.
Friends, I'm not going to complete the quotation. No, jihadi culture has been a part of their life, and I'm sure that two very distinguished speakers that we have today, Professor Ishaq Ahmad and Mr. Satish Chandra, and the author, are all aware of the background. And what I wanted to tell you was that this is something which started from 1947, and the author has very clearly both in his book and in an article in the Hindustan Times, made a very clear-cut case why plebiscite was not decided by Pakistan, didn't go ahead because they had no case at all. I've read many articles on that, and I think his defense is one of the best, and I will leave it to him to speak when his turn comes. I will now request the author and the two speakers to spend 10 to 12 minutes each on the subject. Then we will have a question answer session, which I hope the author and others can answer towards the end. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for chairing the session and giving me the floor. I warmly recall my stint in Karachi under you. I also have warm memories of my Pakistani friends in Karachi. My book, Forgotten Kashmir, The Other Side of the Line of Control, traces the evolution of POK and Gilgit-Baltistan based entirely on Pakistani international and UN sources. The developments in contemporary Pakistan, rather than India's yardsticks, are used to judge Pakistan's policies in POK and Gilgit-Baltistan. Pakistan claimed in debate in the UN Security Council in 1948 that events in Kashmir represented an indigenous uprising against the Dogra regime. Colonel Akbar Khan, who led the tribal invasion as a serving officer of Pakistani army, has mentioned in his memoirs that the decision to launch the tribal invasion was approved in a meeting chaired by the then Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan. Yusuf Sarraf, a Muslim conference activist, has mentioned that no Kashmiri was present or consulted in higher levels of decision making for launching the invasion, even though most of the Muslim conference leaders had crossed over to Pakistan by that time. Sarraf also mentions his discussions with Sardar Ibrahim, the first president of POK. Sardar Ibrahim told him that he announced formation of provisional government of POK on the basis of two midnight calls he received from Rawalpindi, one from Khwaja Rahim, Commissioner of Rawalpindi Division, and the other from Begum Naseem, the then wife of Colonel Akbar Khan, who was leading the tribal invasion. This was no indigenous uprising. Why Rawalpindi, not Karachi? Why did the calls come from Karachi, which was the national capital at the time? Rawalpindi, then as now, was the headquarters of Pakistan Army, which has played a major role in shaping Pakistan's Kashmir policy. There are two key strands in Pakistan's narrative on Kashmir, Azadi and wishes of the people. Wishes of the people are equated with plebiscite in accordance with UN resolutions. Intriguingly, Pakistan shied away from plebiscite on at least 3 occasions when a specific proposal was made. Jinnah turned down Mountbatten's proposal for plebiscite under UN supervision in a meeting on November 2, 1947. The invasion was still going on. Tribals had killed Hindus and Muslims alike. There was no chance of Pakistan winning the vote in a plebiscite in such a situation. The second occasion arose when Owen Dixon, the UN mediator, came to the subcontinent in May 1950. Dixon suggested regional plebiscite. He said that a single plebiscite across the entire state would leave pockets of minorities on either side of the political divide and lead to forced migration. In his report to the UN, he said that India was willing to consider his proposal. Pakistan rejected it. Pakistan's justification was that regional plebiscite was a departure from the principle of single plebiscite. Owen Dixon in the same report has recorded that he was, however, given the impression that Pakistan was willing to accept a partition of the state provided it got the valley. So Pakistan was willing to abandon the principle of a single plebiscite as long as it got the valley without a vote. The third and most telling episode arose in 1950 when Delhi sacked Sheikh Abdullah. Pakistan proposed Prime Minister level talks. At the end of Nehru-Bogra talks, the joint communique issued committed both the countries to plebiscite. 3 months later, on 1st December 1954, Bogra went back on the commitment he had made in Delhi to hold a plebiscite. Pakistan's rejection of plebiscite came much before Nehru finally closed the chapter in 1954. Why consistent reluctance to accept plebiscite, which was otherwise its stated position? To understand this, we have to look into internal situation in POK. Yusuf Sarraf, who later became Chief Justice of POK Supreme Judicial Council, has mentioned that Sardar Ibrahim, first president of POK, was dismissed by Pakistan in April 1950. This was the beginning of revolt by his tribe, Sudhans, which lasted well into the 50s. Pakistan Army was deployed to crush it. The Muslim Conference gave a memorandum to Pakistan's Constituent Assembly in 1955, in which it complained of mass arrest, detention, rape of women, unnatural behavior with young men by Punjab Constabulary and Pakistan Army. The memorandum also said the martial law was declared, and in parts of Punch and heavy caliber weapons, including howitzers, were used against the civilians. With such disturbed conditions, it was no wonder that Pakistan was reluctant to hold plebiscite. For 2 decades, POK was run on the basis of rules of business issued by Ministry of Kashmir Affairs and Northern Areas. They represented Pakistan's wishes, not the wishes of the people of POK. After Pakistan's defeat in 1971 war, the political landscape changed. There were 3 developments in quick succession. Simla Agreement was signed in 72. Pakistan's constitution was adopted in 73, and POK's interim constitution was adopted in 74. In the debate on Simla Agreement in Pakistan National Assembly, Bhutto, the then president of Pakistan, made a candid confession that UN Security Council resolutions did not support Pakistan's case on Kashmir. This was not a one-off statement. He repeated it a fortnight later in Karachi. The Pakistan POK got its interim constitution in 74. This was followed by first elected assembly, which came into existence in 1975. Did the constitution, POK constitution, increase the political space for people of the territory? There are 2 key provisions of this constitution. Article 31 vested legislative powers on as many as 54 subjects in the council headed by Pakistan's Prime Minister. This is in addition to foreign defense and currency. This was ruled by proxy because the council was headed by Prime Minister of Pakistan, and Pakistan always had majority within the council, though there were few members from the POK government also. This arrangement was much criticized. Finally, under 13th Amendment of the POK Constitution in 2018, the council was relegated to the advisory role. However, instead of transferring its powers to the elected assembly, Pakistan assumed them directly. Now Pakistan exercises legislative authority on 32 subjects within POK. Pakistan's approval is needed even on the 22 subjects on which the elected assembly can initiate legislation. This was a year before deletion of Article 370 by India. Gilgit-Baltistan, which was originally called Northern Area and comprises 85% of the territory occupied by Pakistan, was always under stricter control than POK. What is called Azad Kashmir or POK is actually a rump, just 15% of the territory which Pakistan occupied. Gilgit-Baltistan, northern area of Gilgit-Baltistan was brought under Pakistan's administrative control under so-called Karachi Agreement of 1949, which was kept secret. It came to light in a 1993 decision of the POK High Court. The court described separation of northern areas from POK as a violation of UN Security Council resolution because Pakistan had changed the territorial status quo without plebiscite. The authenticity of the Karachi Agreement itself is in doubt. Sardar Ibrahim, a key signatory who was supposed to have signed away northern area as president of POK, in his later life denied ever having signed the agreement. He said, मैंने और भी गलतियां की हैं, ये गलती कभी नहीं की. In 2009, Pakistan created a Gilgit-Baltistan Council and an elected assembly came into being. The assembly was given legislative powers over 61 subjects. This entire list of 61 subjects which were given to the Gilgit-Baltistan was abolished under subsequent Gilgit-Baltistan order of 2018. There were widespread protests and legal challenges to the 2018 order, which was set aside by Gilgit-Baltistan Supreme Appellate Court. Pakistan went into appeal. Pakistan Supreme Court sided with Islamabad and has restored GB order of 2018 against the wishes of the people of the territory. Now, under this order of 2018, all the key legislative powers are vested in the person of the Prime Minister of Pakistan. This includes all the taxation powers, strategic highways, water and electricity, the chief natural resources of the region. Manga Dam, which is located in POK, was completed in 1967 for 36 years. There was no payment of either water usage charge or hydropower royalty to POK for Mangla Dam. When the payments began in 2003, POK was paid 15 paisa per unit as water usage charge, which is 1/7 of the hydropower royalty paid to Pakistan's provinces. This is justified on the ground that under Article 161 of Pakistan's constitution, hydropower royalty can only be paid to Pakistan's provinces, which begs the question, why couldn't this provision be changed? Because there have been 26 amendments of Pakistani constitution since it came into being, but this part was left untouched. It was not a problem when it came to exploiting natural resources of the region. It became an issue when it came to paying for it. Now the paradox is that while Pakistan has tried to reinvent POK and Gilgit-Baltistan in its own image with greater stress on Islamization, this trend diverges when it comes to sharing the political authority. In 2010, under Zardari government, 18th Amendment of Pakistani Constitution took place, which devolved more powers and resources to Pakistan's provinces. However, as I have just described, in 2018, both POK and Gilgit-Baltistan were subjected to greater control of Islamabad. Why the divergence? Because in between, in 2013, CPEC was announced. Gilgit-Baltistan is the artery of CPEC where it enters Pakistan. China is reportedly investing heavily. It has signed MOUs for $16 billion of investment in hydropower projects in Gilgit-Baltistan and $6 billion in POK. And this has underlined the importance of the area to Pakistan's military, which has strengthened its control on the region. One small point about POK elections. The elections took place just a month ago. PTI has come back come to power with a large majority. There is something very curious about these elections in POK and Gilgit-Baltistan. They invariably bring to power the party which is ruling Islamabad. In 2016 elections, PMLN of Nawaz Sharif had won the POK elections. It won 31 seats. This time around, it got only 6 seats. In 2016, PTI of Imran Khan had won only 2 seats. This time it has won 23 seats. This happy coincidence is partly related to the fact that there's a block of refugee seats, 12 seats, which are distributed all over Pakistan, which can be influenced by the federal government. And this produces, strange results like MQM based in Sindh last time won 2 seats in POK elections. The other curious thing about these elections is that in democracy, elections are fought by politicians for power to serve the people. In both GB and POK, the power remains with Pakistan. So this is only a sham. Imran Khan, during Gilgit-Baltistan elections last year, announced a provincial status for the territory. This is to redress the grievance of the people that they are controlled by Islamabad without having a representation in the Federal Assembly. It sounds very logical, except that this will be a violation of the UN resolutions which Pakistan claims to hold, and it will make no difference to people of Gilgit-Baltistan unless Article 161 of Pakistan's constitution is amended to allow for payment of hydropower royalties to Gilgit-Baltistan and POK on par with Pakistan's provinces. Thank you.
I will now request Professor Ishaq Ahmad to give his comments.
The latter part of Ambassador Srivastava's presentation was very difficult to follow because of some disturbance in the signals, I think. But since I've read the book, I don't think there is a problem in what he might have said and what I have not been able to hear. Let me say that this is a very thoroughly researched book, and I learned a lot. I was fully aware of the fact that Pakistan and India agreed to a plebiscite, but both were then not willing to go on and put it into practice. We know the technicalities that India's legal right to be in Kashmir was accepted by the UN, but not that of Pakistan. Pakistan had to vacate the territories of Jammu and Kashmir completely, and then a plebiscite would have been held. Then my impression, I've written on the Kashmir issue at least in 2 books or 3 books now. One is State, Nation, and Ethnicity in Contemporary South Asia, in which I looked at, the appearance of separatist movements in India, where I looked at the Kashmir and Khalistan issue. Then in Pakistan, the Muhajir versus Sindhi issue. Then in Bangladesh, the Chakma tribes versus the Bengali majority. And then in Sri Lanka, the Tamil versus Sinhalese issue. And then again, in my Pakistan, the Garrison State book, and now recently the book on Jinnah. What I want to especially thank the author is that he has brought forth the hesitation in Pakistan up to 1953 and even later. That's the evidence we get, that although the demand to hold a plebiscite remains constant in Pakistan's official policies, in terms of being serious about it, there are all these hesitations. After 53, then Pakistan joins the military pacts, and India took the position that now the idea of a plebiscite is out of the question, because this the Kashmir Assembly in India had voted for joining India on a permanent basis. The original, accession bill was instrument was for temporary accession, but that has been completed. But what we learn now is that even on the Pakistani side, this whole idea of a plebiscite is not really meant to put it into practice. And I learned that even Benazir Bhutto thought that a plebiscite may not, even if there is a Muslim majority in Kashmir, Pakistan may not win that plebiscite, and therefore there is a hesitation as late as Benazir Bhutto's time. But my question now is that Imran Khan, in recent pronouncements on this issue, has said that when he thinks about the right of self-determination, the original idea of a plebiscite, either you join India or Pakistan, is not the only option he has in mind, but that this would mean joining India or Pakistan or remaining independent. I think it's once again a bluff. That's my opinion, but I would like to know from the ambassador, what does he have to say now? Would India be keen to have a plebiscite, having been in favor of it for at least till 53? Or from the Indian side also, after the integration, the end of this, special status for India, that is no longer an alternative or an option to be considered. So then, the way I have argued, and I think this is what the book seems to suggest, is that the line of control is the de facto international border, if it be converted into the de jure international border. I think, for me, this was difficult now, how to handle your way of calling it Pakistan-Occupied Kashmir. Pakistan calls it Azad Kashmir. I have taken the position that is the Pakistani administered Kashmir and there is an Indian administered Kashmir. But now, after India having integrated its Kashmir and removing this special status, then one can even call the Pakistani Kashmir and the Indian Kashmir, that the two remain with the two powers, because that's where the ceasefire and then the line of control decided the fate of this Jammu and Kashmir state. And now, or in 10 years or in 100 years, I think this is the only solution which will work. I was very impressed by the evidence given about how in Pakistan, while we complain a lot about the government, the union government rigging elections, 1989 especially is mentioned. On the Pakistani side, this seems to be an institutionalized practice, that no election is free at all. Then in that case, India has not been very good in its external, propaganda or, combating the Pakistani position with the evidence on the Pakistani Kashmir. Maybe this book will go a long way in balancing that propaganda war. Pakistan is all the time complaining. Every day I hear about now Gilani, when he died, his corpse was not handed over to his family and all that, and this whips up hysteria among people, parts of the, Punjab at least. But after this book, and I hope somehow it is read in Pakistan, there's a lot of hard work which has gone into this work, and it's done with a lot of sincerity, no doubt. But of course, there are the limitations of an individual who has served the Indian state, and there are certain things which have not been discussed. For example, we talk about the invasion, but I wish the proper background to that invasion had been included, like the Punch uprising, and then the reprisals on the Muslim population of Jammu. You know, some people say that the Maharaja of Kashmir ensured that if the Kashmir Valley could not be converted into a Hindu majority part of his state, at least in Jammu, which also had a Muslim majority, by force could be converted into a Hindu majority part of Jammu and Kashmir. And I think that was achieved. So there was a lot of violence used against the Jammu Muslims by the forces of the Maharaja. I don't think Nehru or Patel were involved in that. This was done entirely by the Maharaja, who initially wanted to keep Kashmir independent and somehow manage it on his own. When that didn't work, then that's what he did. So I think that part of the story, if it had been included, the credibility of the work would greatly increase for the Pakistani readers, because I'm sure this is what they will immediately point out. Why not discuss? Was it 200,000 killed, as some people say, or 20,000 killed? What we know is that in 47, the Jammu population of Muslims was about 63%, and now I checked, it is 33%. So where have all those people gone? They were driven out of what is Jammu now and became refugees and so on and so forth. So that's the only thing which I found, if the author had brought into the picture, because it begins with the invasion. But the background of the invasion, I think the Punch uprising is the first, if I'm not mistaken. Then either these tribals come in, and you know the details about how they raped women and looted. I've given in my books as well, you know, Pakistan, the Garrison State, as well as in the Jinnah book. Notoriously, they even raped old nuns in a Catholic monastery, I think. So all that shows the predatory nature of that invasion. But of course, now with Pakistan being created in the name of Islam and Chaudhry Rahmat Ali having K added because of Kashmir, you have all those concerns in Pakistan that Kashmir is the jugular vein of Pakistan. This is Jinnah saying, not any other run-of-the-mill sort of politician. So, and then that the people of Kashmir, all of them were overwhelmingly Muslim, so it should have come to Pakistan. That was not included either in the 3 June plan or in the 18 July 1947 Indian Independence Act. Actually, the Indian Independence Act is quiet on the future of the princely states. But in the 3 June plan, I think it says that paramountcy does not descend either to India or Pakistan. And the ruler can join India or Pakistan or remain independent. A few tried to exercise their right, but we know how things turned out ultimately. We went into Kalat, and then India went into Hyderabad. So if it was simply a matter of the ruler making a decision, well, both states then are guilty of having ridden roughshod over the right of the ruler to decide which way to go. I think I'll stop at this, because insofar as the material which has been presented, I think this is going to be a book of its own kind. And my hope is that more than India, this is read in Pakistan, because only when one gets to know the way the Indians have established their dossier on Kashmir, can some reasonable position be taken in Pakistan? Because the Indian case is very strong. Pakistani Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan, they have been ruled by the Pakistani state in a very direct manner. The constitutions are there, but who gives a damn? I mean, they have all the means at their disposal to offset the formal constitutional provisions. So I think this is where, for me, this book is a very important, very relevant, seriously researched book on the political situation in the Pakistani Kashmir. So I would like to congratulate the author. Can't hear you, sir.
Thank you.
Can't hear.
Thank you, Professor Ishaq Ahmed. The debate has reached a very interesting stage. I had in my initial comments mentioned about Dinkar's article in the Hindustan Times and in the book about plebiscite. He himself had touched it, and Professor Ishaq Ahmed made it the centerpiece of his speech. I can think of no better person to have the last word than Satish Chandra, my old colleague. Satish, you will have many things to say, but here you are. Over to you.
Thank you, Sati. It's good seeing you. And I'm particularly glad that you are chairing this session, and the panel is eminent, and Dinkar is also an old friend. So it's great to be here, and I feel privileged that I have the opportunity to speak. Forgotten Kashmir, while touching upon Pakistan's invasion of Kashmir and the issue of self-determination, is primarily focused on Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, comprising both Gilgit-Baltistan and so-called Azad Kashmir. These areas tend to be touched upon only tangentially in much other literature that is available with us on Kashmir. And therefore, Dinkar, I think, needs to be congratulated for filling this gap with this extremely valuable book. And I agree fully with Professor Ishaq Ahmed and you that this is an outstanding work. I think its credibility is vastly enhanced by the fact that many of the main references are from Pakistan, and that adds to the credibility. Dinkar, for those who don't know, Sati knows, I know, is particularly well placed in writing on Kashmir because he was our points man when we dealt with this issue in the UN in the 1990s. And he was a very valuable member of the team which countered the efforts made against us in the matter. And, one can't thank him enough for that. I had a few points to make, and I'll also make a few comments on what Professor Saab said, with many of whose comments I would concur with. But I have some points which I'll make, and I'll touch on what he said, some of what he said. I think the book conclusively debunks the contention that what transpired in Kashmir in 47 was an indigenous uprising. And it establishes that what happened was not just a simple tribal invasion or an act of retribution, but was rather a very well-planned major operation supported by Pakistan. And this began much before the actual events happened. And you can't arm people in a flash. This had been done. The Muslim conference had no hold in Kashmir. Its senior leadership had no clue of that a provisional government was to be established. And Dinkar has referred to that, so I won't go into that again. The the decision was taken in Pakistan by Pakistanis. It was not a Kashmiri decision. The second point, which is interesting, is that if we were to suggest that Pakistan's entree into Kashmir proper was under the garb of a tribal invasion, then what happened in Gilgit-Baltistan was a blatant coup d'etat executed by Major Brown. And he did so in reaction to the Maharaja's accession to India. And this happened on 31st October 1947, when the governor was arrested and Gilgit-Baltistan acceded to Pakistan. The people didn't want that. That also has been written in this book. And the conclusion that one draws is really that Major Brown, acting in cahoots with Pakistan and the British, ensured that Gilgit-Baltistan was separated from POK and made subservient to NWFP. In this context, bear in mind that Major Brown's first communication in the matter was to the NWFP Premier, and the political agent appointed to Gilgit-Baltistan was from NWFP. I think he was a Tahsildar or something. These were in clear violation of the Independence Act, Indian Independence Act, as well as of the stand-down orders which had been given by the British. But this was not a one-off move. This was a part of a plan. And that plan was to separate Gilgit-Baltistan from POK. And this was accomplished by what Sati had mentioned and Dinkar had mentioned. This was the Karachi Agreement of April 49, which incidentally remained completely secret till 1993, during when it came up in the POK case. Now, the point is, what did the agreement do? It, of course, put so-called Azad Kashmir squarely under Pakistan, but it separated Gilgit-Baltistan totally into an even more abject situation vis-a-vis Pakistan. The point basically is that the POK High Court in 1993, and this has been detailed in the book, declared this action as illegal and called for the restoration of the northern areas to POK. It is another matter that the Supreme Court annulled this decision on a technical ground. But the point is that the POK High Court finding was that this was an illegal action. The next thing which is of interest is that the book puts to rest in no uncertain terms the myth, and this is a myth, that the UNSC resolutions on Kashmir called for self-determination, and points out that what they were focused was on a plebiscite. The two terms really can't be used interchangeably, and they should not be used that way. It also examines closely the UNCIP resolution of August 48 on Kashmir, underlining that plebiscite was just a binary choice between India and Pakistan and was only to take place following Pakistan's vacation of aggression. Since the latter never happened, the plebiscite could never take place. It just was not possible within the UN system with that sort of an approach. Well, now, why this Pakistani aversion to plebiscite? And Dinkar has, in the book, cited many, many factors. But the basic fact is simple, and I'll only refer to that. The basic fact is that while Jammu and Kashmir, which was with India at the time, by popular will, acceded to India, that POK could never do because there was a rebellion on for several years. And in fact, this was the Sudan Revolt, which I was not actually aware of till I read Dinkar's book and studied it a little bit. That I was not aware that for several years this had gone on. And in fact, the Muslim Conference came to the government of Pakistan and detailed the number of people it ran into lakhs that were killed. And This is the reason that it will be highly unpopular. But I will add to what Dinkar has said in his book and why Pakistan's aversion becomes absolutely clear to plebiscite. The fact of the matter is, and this is highlighted in Shekhar Dasgupta's book, the fact of the matter is that following the Junagadh imbroglio while it was on, in September 47 itself, there was a decision taken at a very high level in India that in case of states where there is some sort of difference on accession, India would be prepared to go with a plebiscite. This primarily referred to, as you may guess, to 3 states. It was Junagadh, it was Jammu and Kashmir, and it was Hyderabad. This was put to Pakistan on the 30th September by Mountbatten, to Liaquat Ali Khan, in fact. Pakistan showed no interest in the matter because it knew that the people in all 3 states would not vote in favor of an accession to it, and hence the aversion to plebiscite. The book has actually a splendid chapter, which as a purist, I appreciated, and I think people need to study it because it is a chapter titled Wishes of the People. And here it traces beautifully the evolution of the concept of self-determination internationally and later on the applicability to Jammu and Kashmir. At the time when Kashmir was under debate in 48 in the UN, the point of self-determination had a very faint echo in the UN Charter, and it was very, very limited. The concept actually grew from in the 1960s and 1970s in the context of decolonization. And even there was the caveat that this will not extend to the political unity where it impinges that, or the sovereignty of independent states. So it wasn't to be applicable there. And here it is interesting that in the context of Bangladesh, which happened in 71, 72, at that point in time, the whole issue of exercise of the right of self-determination was denied to Bangladesh because even though it was the victim of genocide. The final expansion took place in Vienna. Dinkar and I were present there at the International the Human Rights Conference, where this was extended to all peoples that they should have it. But even so, there was a caveat. This could not be used to undermine the territorial integrity or unity of sovereign independent states as long as they had a representative government and were non-discriminatory in the treatment of their people. So this is the scope of how this concept has evolved over the years, and it's a beautiful chapter just for that. Now here I'll come to what Professor Saab had mentioned. I agree with him. Imran Khan's, I think it is a total bluff. If they could not agree to plebiscite at that point in time, I don't see it going forward. And then you would go forward beyond that. Would it also apply to NWFP? After all, they were not allowed the choice of independence. Would that can of worms need to be opened up as well? Also, you pose the question, Professor Saab, and it is a legitimate question. Would India look at plebiscite again? And from what little I know, I'm not within the system, but I'm pretty confident the answer would be a straightforward no. Times have changed, things have evolved. And even if you look at I do tend to, perhaps I'm an exception, but I do look at the morality of things also. I think any plebiscite would be overlooking the fact of aggression. The point is that India as a state had been aggressed upon. in 1947. That fact of aggression can never be wiped out. And I tell you, even in India, there are many who question the decisions taken by Prime Minister Nehru and the government of the time for agreeing to the plebiscite, because this is contrary to the Indian Independence Act. I think quite clearly in my mind, it is established that this concept has no place today in Jammu and Kashmir, the concept of self-determination, for two reasons. Number one, it was a legal accession, and the professor has agreed to that point, which is a fact which is undeniable. The other point is that Jammu and Kashmir has been allowed the same, has enjoyed the same rights as any other states, perhaps more than that. And it has been a regular participant in the democratic framework in India. Another beautiful thing, Sati, if I have 3-4 minutes more, not much more, but 3-4 points which I enjoyed in the book, I think many others will enjoy it also, was that in the process of this book, it exposes British perfidy in a delightful manner. Mountbatten's assertion, while accepting Hari Singh's accession to India, that the state's future would be decided in accordance with the wishes of the people in a plebiscite, was contrary to the Indian Independence Act. Why did he do so? There was really no reason for him to do so, because it is left to the ruler to decide either way. And in fact, this had been made clear to Hari Singh by India that you wish to go to Pakistan, go. This was pre-independence. He had been told this. But British perfidy, after the event, they talk of plebiscite. Interestingly, while espousing self-determination and plebiscite for Kashmir, the British were free and easy with that. It's not their territory. But as regards Cyprus in 1957, they opposed the application of that to Cyprus. I mean, it's totally illogical, and it is perfidious to the extreme. Stand-down principles, which I refer to, Major Brown's patch. I mean, on what basis could that apply when you accept stand-down principle? And finally, and this is really something which is applicable to the international community, not alone to Britain, it is that the fact of Pakistan's invasion of Kashmir and subsequent takeover of Azad Kashmir, so-called Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan, the fact that the British stood by that is amazing. And really, I never had great respect for the Goras of that variety. And this is a reason. I won't speak much on what Dinkar has already said on the situation of so-called Azad Kashmir and POK and so on and so forth. He has mentioned chapter and verse, the manner in which those territories have been ruled and without any democratic right or anything like that. But this fact was also brought out in a judgment, which I'd like to mention, which is the Pakistan Supreme Court's judgment of May 1999. It's a scathing indictment of the government of Pakistan. And it, in fact, called upon the government to take within 6 months measures to ensure that the people enjoyed their fundamental rights, I'm quoting now, to be governed through their chosen representatives. It also stated that they should have access to justice through an independent judiciary, inter alia, for enforcement of fundamental rights. It's needless to say that nothing has happened. I won't speak on Mangla and so forth. Dinkar has referred to it. But just as a concluding couple of points, it's a serious book, but there are many little lighter movements which were a cause of enjoyment, certainly to me and to others. Dinkar mentioned one of them about Sardar Muhammad Ibrahim Khan learning of this from Colonel Akbar Khan's then wife, Nazim Shahnawaz, that he should take over next morning as the provisional as a governor of the provisional government in Azad Kashmir. But also, it is interesting, and this is quoting Sheikh Abdullah from his book. Asked by a national conference activist if Kashmir's future would be decided by its people, Jinnah responded, "Let the people of Kashmir go to hell." Next point, which I want to mention, Saraf. He's quoting Saraf. He relates an occasion on which Prime Minister Suravardi motioned towards Sardar Ibrahim and told the Chief Secretary, "Isko takht pe batha do." I'll conclude there. But I thought these were rather funny quotes, which for someone who wasn't so familiar with this aspect of things, Dinkar's book was a revelation, and God bless. Dinkar write many more of such things. Many thanks.
Thank you, Satish. I think it was a fitting tribute to a very useful discussion. I have read this judgment of the Supreme Court of Pakistan, which you have said, and I referred it to a Pakistani friend. He said, but we haven't read it, and we have no intention of reading it. So that explains. Thank you. And I find amongst the questions, there is only one question, and that depends on, that's on demography. I just wanted to tell you that Pakistan's population from 1980 to today has trebled. India's has doubled. I think we both need to learn a lesson from Bangladesh, which is a role model in this. And there is no other question that I find on the board. I will request Dinkar to give his comments on, if he has any, on the very useful discussions which we have had.
Sir, thank you, sir. I have learned a lot from all of you, know much more about the subject than I do. Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed made 3 points. I'll respond to them, but I'll slightly change the sequence and, make it in a chronological order. Independence of India Act of British Parliament had Article 7, which gave the rulers the right to decide the accession. There is no reference to the people. And Mountbatten, as Crown representative, accepted accession from the princess, who were the rulers. Independence option was not mentioned at all in Independence of India Act. There were just 2 dominions mentioned.
Right.
Why Jinnah referred to independence option? Because there were more princely states on the Indian side. I think there were just out of 560 odd princely states, there were just about 9 in Pakistan. So encouragement to independence option on the part of rulers was essentially encouraging balkanization of India. And that is the reason why Mr. Jinnah mentioned it. When it came to Kalat, he marched the Pakistani army. Kalat was not the only one. The same fate was met by Bahawalpur, which wanted to stay out. The second point was about the Punch uprising. It is a fact that the communal disturbances took place. This took place before Indian state had anything to do with it. Dogra forces may have been involved. There is the other view that this was, by that time the massacre in West Pakistan had already started, and the refugees fleeing from Punjab, they were responsible for this. But whatever it is interesting that Punch disturbances or Punch killings or massacre, as it was later called, do not find any mention in the Declaration of Independence or formation of provisional government made by Sardar Ibrahim. So this was part of subsequent narrative which was built up. There were disturbances, there were killings, but the scale is exaggerated. Now, coming to the third point, which is Imran Khan's comment. This is in the context of recent elections in POK, and this was in response to a charge by Maryam Nawaz Sharif, who was campaigning on behalf of PMLN, that Imran Khan was trying to snatch away the identity of POK by making it a province of Pakistan. Prime Minister Imran Khan responded to it. He said, baat zameen ki nahi hai. This is not only, Pakistan is not only interested simply in a question of zameen, land. He said that there will be, he mentioned two referendum. The first referendum will be when people of Kashmir will decide to join Pakistan. After they have joined Pakistan, then he said he will give them a second referendum to decide on independence option. Why this, convoluted way of, doing it? You can do it in the same, in one referendum, which would create a problem, which was a problem explained by Benazir Bhutto in her 94 interview to New York Times. She said that in case she dismissed the independence option, because she said this was a ploy. And she said that in case of a referendum, Hindus and Sikhs, being the minority, will vote for India, the Muslim vote will get fractured. And as she said, this will result in, there will be no change in status quo. Now, this was a very significant admission, because this was an admission that Pakistan would lose the vote. Because if Pakistan wins the vote, there would be a change of status quo. So what she was referring to was that Pakistan will lose the vote. And this is why Imran Khan has taken precaution not to combine the two issues in a single referendum. Now, that brings me to the last point. It's a very strange thing. First, you opt in, and then you opt out. Right now, POK is called Azad Kashmir, and even then, Azadi is ruled out constitutionally by POK constitution. So if Prime Minister Imran Khan is clear about giving them an independence option, they should begin by amending the existing constitution, instead of first letting them join Pakistan and then forcing them and then giving them the choice to opt out. Whether India will follow this lead, as Master Satish Chandra has mentioned, this will not be the case. It is not part of India's position. India's position is that the accession took place in 1947. There are issues, there are problems, but I think the Indian democracy can cope with it. The way forward, as I have mentioned, I have given the example of your EU, is the regional integration. And I have also treated this issue of self-determination. I could have had the choice of limiting it to 1947-48. That would have made my task very easy, because Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted in 1948, the same year Kashmir issue went to the United Nations, did not mention right of self-determination. So right of self-determination was yet to evolve. It has a very faint echo in UN Charter, not a coincidence, because the framers of the Charter, the colonial powers, were not in a hurry to liquidate their colonial possession. I have attempted the more difficult exercise, which is to assume or accept the expanded scope and then have shown that even that is not acceptable. And it is not simply the Indian version. You look at the Catalonia referendum, you look at the Mosul referendum. Catalonia referendum results have been rejected by all EU countries. Mosul referendum results have been rejected by all of its neighbors. In fact, even Turkey and Iran, which are on the opposite side of the spectrum, have rejected it. So international community is not in a mood to redraw the borders. The way forward is regional integration. which is something which India has been pressing. I will just like to quickly touch on 2-3 other points which got left out. You know, Pakistan has appropriated Kashmir cause, but how many Kashmiris are there in POK? Or how many were there in the Muslim Conference leadership? It's very interesting that Jinnah, in his visit to Kashmir in 1948 before independence, he told the Muslim Conference leaders that he wanted Muslim Conference to have a leader who can speak Kashmiri. Now, this is something which tells you something, that Muslim Conference was essentially a party of punch, and the Kashmiris, there were very few Kashmiris there. Now, this problem continues to date. Fast forward to the last elections, which took place a month ago in POK, and there were some writings, this is again in Pakistani press, about complaining about the imbalance in the seat distribution. There are 12 refugee seats, 6 are given to Jammu division, 6 to Kashmir division. Now, the author, who's a Pakistani and is a, you know, obviously from Jammu region, he says that this is very uneven because 30,000 Kashmiris have been given 6 seats, while 436,000 odd, I don't remember the exact figure, I can give it, have been also given the same 6 seats. Now, if you look, now total electorate of POK is 3.2 million. So 30,000 Kashmiris represent less than 1% of total electorate of POK, and they represent just about 6% of the refugee population within POK. So this is again something which has to be borne in mind, that when Pakistan talks about Kashmir cause. Now, Azadi, how much Azadi they have? The area was integrated, right, and controlled effectively. As far back as 1977, Ghulam Ishaq Khan, the then cabinet secretary who later became president of Pakistan, he issued a directive to all the government departments that Azad Kashmir should be treated like any other province of Pakistan. The same directive was repeated about in 1988 by his successor, the then cabinet secretary. So effectively, this has already been integrated in Pakistan. State subjects rule. You know, there is this debate about Kashmiriyat versus religious identity, and Kashmiriyat is, of course, discouraged. The POK constitution has continuously diluted the state subjects rule. On the other hand, it has a very strong definition of who's a Muslim. The paradoxical effect is it has not affected minorities because there are hardly any minorities. It's 98% Muslims, which was not the case at the time of independence. There were about 30% non-Muslims, Hindus and Sikhs. So now it's no longer an issue because it's 98 or 98.5% are Muslims. So the definition of Muslims has only one result, which it has created divisions within the Muslim community. So Ahmadiyyas were declared non-Muslims in POK before they were declared non-Muslims in Pakistan. Sir Zafrullah Khan, who argued Pakistan's case on Kashmir in Security Council, if he were alive, he would have been declared a non-Muslim not only in Pakistan but also in POK. Self-determination, Ambassador Satish Chandra has mentioned the twists and turns of the British position. The British went so far as suggesting in 1957 that UN troops should be deployed in Kashmir to supervise a plebiscite. Now, the same year, in 1957, the British representative speaking at the United Nations said on the issue of Cyprus, the application of self-determination without any regard to circumstances would be subversive of established government everywhere and could only lead to chaos. there were in every part of the world examples which would prove how disastrous would be the consequences of applying the principle of self-determination without qualification. That was bad enough, but it would be worse if it were to be recognized that one state could claim the right of self-determination and United States support for that right in respect of part of the territory of another state. Now, this is a British position. Coming back to the present situation, and I have ended my book quoting Faiz Ahmad Faiz, who's my favorite poet. And Faiz Sahab wrote this couplet after visit to Dhaka along with Bhutto. And this is, हम थे ठहरे अजनबी इतनी मदारातों के बाद, फिर बनेंगे आशना कितनी मुलाकातों के बाद, कब नजर में आएगी बेदाग सब्जी की बहार, खून के धब्बे धुलेंगे कितनी बरसातों के बाद. He was saying that खून के धब्बे धुलेंगे कितनी बरसातों के बाद, that after so many seasons these stains of the blood will be removed. So this was an expression of hope that the two parts of the country which had separated will come together. Why did they separate? The separation itself showed the futility of two-nation theory on which Pakistan rests its claim on Kashmir. Incidentally, the separation of East Pakistan and emergence of Bangladesh also created another minority, which was the Biharis. While Pakistan has raised the Kashmiri issue in all fora, it agreed to take the Biharis, who had twice sacrificed for Pakistan, in 1947 when they opted for Pakistan and went to East Pakistan, and in 1971 when they sided with federal government against the East Pakistanis. And they are still there living in refugee camps. There was an agreement between Pakistan and Bangladesh to take them back. It has not been implemented by successive Pakistani governments, because if I could paraphrase Prime Minister Imran Khan, ये ज़मीन का मसला है. This is the question of ये ज़मीन का मसला नहीं है. There is no land coming back with the Biharis. Kashmir ज़मीन का मसला. There is a land issue involved there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dinkar. Thank you, IIC, and thank you, the speakers. I think it has been a very useful discussion. I only wish there was more audience participation, but thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed taking part in this discussion. Thank you.